It's lockdown in New Zealand. Everyone is at home. I figured this was the perfect opportunity because there's no one around, because there's no cars, because there's nothing. It'd be a really good time to try night photography for the first time. Some of these turned out not too bad. They turned out alright. Some of them were kind of not great at all. But I'm going to include them in this video anyway because it's a learning experience and it's the first time I've done it. And if anyone else is wanting to try night photography, come along on this adventure with me. So as usual, I was using my Mamiya RB67 and I had a 1/4 Promus filter on the lens to try and make the lights glow a little bit more, and also using Portra 400. Yes. So the first stop was this fish and chip store that I've driven past a few times, and I really liked how the blue was sort of like glowing from it. So I wanted to try capture that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This one didn't work too well. I think the street lights on the building were too like bright and orange. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't great. Went down the street a little bit and came across these sort of industrial looking buildings that were lit by the street lights, which looked kind of cool in person. I wasn't expecting it to be a good photo because there was only one light source and it kind of, I wasn't sure about it, but I wanted to try it anyway. It wasn't terrible. It matches a lot of the other buildings that I've taken photos of. Sort of started cruising through the neighborhood on the bike, came across this car that was parked under the streetlights. Again, not great, not bad, just kind of there. So ended up at this place, kind of like a town square sort of thing. Some of these would have been really cool to shoot, these stores, but they were closed obviously because it's lockdown. So I might have to revisit them another time. But what was open was the subway exit, which I thought looked pretty cool. It was glowing and it looked really sort of like a nice worm in the darkness. After almost getting hit by several cars, I ended up with this. It's probably one of the better ones of the night. I wish I got wider. I wish I framed it a little bit better. So this is one of those ones where I might come back and redo it. But I was pretty happy with how it turned out. The greens were glowing quite nicely, sort of just how I wanted it really. Across the train tracks from that subway, I ended up on the other side, obviously. Turns out it's very difficult carrying a big camera, a tripod, another camera, and also a bike by myself around my neighborhood. There were bus stops that had little lights in them similar to the subway, and so I shot a couple of photos of those bus stops. They turned out really well. They were some of my favorite ones of the night. Again, it's one of the ones that I might come back and re-photograph like a bit wider, framed a bit better. I think, yeah, it turned out pretty good. Not too upset with that one. You know, as I was cruising down the middle of the road, I came across the pedestrian crossing. There's quite a few that look similar to this around where I live. So I tried to take a photo of it. Not great, I have to say. I think my perspective was too low. So like shooting from like an eye level, there wasn't really anything to see. So those didn't turn out too well. Later on that night, I found a pedestrian crossing with like a higher vantage point, like on a bridge. I shot that. It looked a little bit better. It still wasn't great, but it was better than those other ones. Also on the way home, I stumbled across this church. The lights were on inside and the windows were glowing like a nice little orange. This scene was too dark for my light meter to even like read. So I guessed it completely and shot a 1-minute exposure, and turns out it was perfect. But yeah, that was another one of the ones that I think were probably a success in the night, was that church. Yeah, that church was cool. And then I ended up at the next train station down from the other one that I was just at. I've always wanted to photograph this particular station because it's got like an old building in the middle. It looks really cool, but the area around it is really ugly, so I've always struggled to take photos of it. Went over there. First I set up a shot looking at the bridge. Just as I was about to take the photo, I heard a train coming, so I waited for that to come, and I'm really glad I did, because the long exposure of that train going past filled in what would have been just a big black hole basically in the photo. But that ended up quite cool, surprisingly. And then obviously I turned around and walked through the station to try to take some photos, and those ones turned out really well. They weren't really long, they were like 1 second exposures, so I feel like I cheated a little bit, but the photos turned out cool, so I'll take it. This one has a little bit of motion blur where I had to manually close the shutter. If you've shot nighttime photos on an RB, you know that you have to do it manually, which is really annoying. You can't really see it unless you like zoom in, so it's not too bad. And that was the whole roll. I went home, slept very well because that was exhausting. Overall, I think it turned out pretty good. I think for a first ever roll of nighttime exposures, I think it turned out pretty well. I was pleasantly surprised with some of those, considering not only was that the first time doing night exposures like on the RB, it was the first time doing night exposures just like with digital, with any camera. So that was nice. That was a cool little thing to do over lockdown. So that's the video. By no means an instructional or educational video. It was purely just my first experience doing this. If you haven't done it before, hope it inspires you to try it yourself, because it's really fun. It's cool. Yeah, thanks for coming with me on this night photography trip. Now there's people coming, so I'm gonna run away.